The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Welcome to another exciting episode of In Conversation with Alethia. I am your host, Alethia O'Hara-Stephenson. In each episode, I sit down with amazing individuals from our community who are doing incredibly inspiring things. The show will educate, it will empower, and it will inspire you. Today, I am tremendously honored to have an incredible guest with us. She is an artist. She's also a PhD student as well as a Vanier scholar. Her name is Debbie Ebanks Shlums. And today we're going to be talking about archiving and cataloging the Jamaican-Canadian diaspora, the legacy, the rich legacy the Jamaican-Canadian community brings right here in Ontario, dating back from the 60s to the 80s. Welcome to In Conversation with Alethia.
Hello, Alethia. Thank you so much for inviting me. I've been watching your episodes, and so I'm just thrilled to be here. Thank you so much.
Oh, this is awesome. I'm really excited to dive into not just your project that you're working on, but your history, your background. So in researching your bio, I found out that you were born and raised in Kingston, Jamaica.
Yes.
Amazing.
So my parents, they came from the country. So my mother's from Clarendon, and her parents were Chinese, and also her mother was mixed, so black and Chinese, and also a white enslaver.
Yes.
And then my father is from St. Elizabeth, Southfield, and so they met in Kingston.
Amazing.
And had a couple of kids, 3 of us, and then we emigrated here when I was 4 years old.
Wow. Amazing history. And it's just, I found it fascinating because here you are, as we would say back home, uptown girl, country girl, Kingstonian, and it's from St. Anne. So that's pretty neat to be able to dive into this history and to have the conversation and talking about that journey when you look at, the Jamaican diaspora and how that connects with the Canadian audience. But before we even get to that story, I want to dive a little bit more into your history. So you're a PhD student and a Vanier scholar. Can you tell us about what that means? Because that sounds pretty impressive.
It is impressive, and you know what? I'm a mature student, shall we say, and I wanted to do my PhD when I finished my master's back in the 90s, and I was studying political science, international relations. And I loved the politics, but I didn't like the way people were talking about Jamaica at the time. I'd actually done an internship in Jamaica after my undergrad. And, sitting in the room, seeing people from the EU come and just talk down to us was disempowering. And then my colleagues, my supervisors, they were saying this is how it is all the time. And I didn't want to be a part of that really, so I kind of lost interest in that. And my heart has always been with art. And my dad would always send me, throughout my adulthood, art shows going on and this and that, when I was still studying politics. And so he knew where my heart was. And so then I decided to pursue art. And you're always struggling to make a living, because I don't really sell work. I make more conceptual work and community work. And so I thought, maybe I'll find another way to do a project. And it was just a great timing. I met a professor. I used to direct a film festival.
Okay.
Or co-direct a film festival, and she asked me if I wanted to do the PhD, and I said yes. It's right here, but I'm not ready yet, because there were things I wanted to do with the film festival. And so I did that for 3 years, and when I was done, I said, I'm ready now. She said, I'm going to get you funding.
Oh my gosh.
And so the PhD opened up for me. So it wasn't just a written project, like, 300 dissertation that a 300 page dissertation that I had to do. I can make an artwork. So a research creation plus a written component that's quite rigorous. And then, and just because of the approach that I was making in this archive on Jamaican diaspora, like there's nothing that's comprehensive on us. So, and mine isn't going to be, there's no way it can be comprehensive, but
it's a start.
It's a start, and connecting the little, the archives, the bits and pieces and different archives around, and being able to connect that. So, that got me the Vanier, and she really mentored me throughout that scholarship. So if anyone is out there looking for scholarships, like the mentoring really helps. How to write it, I wrote 11 drafts for this.
Oh my goodness!
And she, like down to the, couple of words until it was perfect, and I got the Vanier, which is like one of the 2 top scholarships in Canada. So it was quite thrilling.
When the scholarship was announced, you were one of 2 recipients at the time.
Yes.
And that's all of Canada.
Oh, well, at my university.
At your university,
At my university, yes.
That is impressive.
Yeah.
And kudos to you, congratulations, because that is no small feat. That is an impressive accomplishment.
Yeah.
And the fact that you're doing your PhD many years later, you've been out of school, you've had a family, and you've embarked on this impressive journey. My hat goes off to you.
Oh, thank you, Alethia.
No problem. Now, I want to dive into the research that you're doing, and I want to tap into the period specifically, because if we look back at Canadian immigration back in the 50s, I believe that's when the Canadian immigration opened up to have domestic workers, particularly from Jamaica and I think Barbados, and other Caribbean islands, but those were the 2 primary islands. Is that any correlation to the work that you're doing and why you're archiving from that specific time period?
So I'm looking at the kind of post-independence period, and the 50s is just prior to that, but it's kind of coming up towards that. So I'm just really trying to figure out what was that time like, but also what do we consider archives even, like, and that was a basic question, and I started there, and I went I learned all about regular archives, and got so much into these sort of official archives, and then I've come all the way back, and I'm like, what are our archives again? So and a lot of it's stories.
Yes.
I think of also gestures as archives, the way we move, the way we speak when we move. Like, I don't have the language anymore, except in my head. I speak it in my head.
I do the same thing.
But it's like when I hear myself, all I hear is my Canadian accent, so I don't like to speak it, but I think I need to practice.
Yes.
And so I think that's so important is just the ways, and because you couldn't write things down, you were forbidden to write things down, and say people were forbidden to learn, forbidden to do, and all that documentation was from the enslaver's perspective. So getting our perspective is really where our history is.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And I know you touched on, gestures and body language, and oftentimes, when we look at our parents as an example, it would be the head turning in a certain way, or, the facial expression will tell you that you're in trouble. No words are spoken, but you know that you are in trouble. So I think it's quite fascinating that you're able to catalog this rich history. Now, when I look back at, again, talking about the immigration period from, the 50s to the 60s, if I look at StatsCan, the Jamaican community is one of the largest Black population in Canada and concentrated heavily here in Ontario. So I'm sure it's no surprise why you've selected Ontario to do your research to catalog that history. And so now that you've started on this journey, what are you uncovering?
Yeah, it's so hard because the diaspora is so large, and you can only capture a little, and I want to have, my hope is that there will be a really diverse representation of people from all walks of life, And so I'm still at the very beginning. I'm starting in Shelburne, where I live. I think it's very important to start where you are. And what I've discovered, which I did not expect, was that a lot of people came here after the 80s, like after the time period that I wanted to. So then I went back to my professor and I said, is this okay? Like, do I have to have such a narrow time period? And she said, well, if your main question is what are the archives, then you can see like what's the, you know, like, are there differences between these earlier periods of migration and the later periods of migration, and then how they also interact with each other to help keep those archives going, you know, like, and even how the internet works to help us remember, oh yes,
absolutely,
because as you know, like my sort of older generation, so my aunties, my parents, they're starting to go now.
Right.
And they came in the 60s and the 70s. And when they go, I'm realizing I'm not hearing the language like I used to, like as my everyday, because I don't speak, I'm not married to Jamaican, and so we're not speaking patois, so I'm just not hearing it anymore. I'm not hearing my grandmother's stories anymore.
Right. It's lost.
So that loss is kind of driving me to try to just preserve what we have right now from that time period.
And so how important is it to archive it? Because if it's already on its way out, not quite lost with you, but when we think of the next generation of Jamaican Canadians, right, what is the impact? So what is the importance of archiving?
Yeah, what is the important, like, to know who you are.
I love it.
Yeah, there are aspects. There's one person, I'm not going to mention any names yet because all of this isn't released yet, but who was actually born in Canada, and her parents came, I think it was in maybe the 50s or 60s, I can't really recall, but she's now a senior. But she has so many connections to Jamaica. She eats the food. She has all of this paraphernalia. Her family was involved in the foundation of the Jamaican-Canadian Association.
Amazing.
So and being Jamaican as well as Canadian is part of who she is. And you know, and being black, I know it's strange to look at me and say I'm a black woman, but that's where I find myself. Like I've never been considered Chinese.
Right.
So
out of 21 people, that's the motto, right?
Yeah. So, to like where, like, black is so broad.
It is.
And it has so many different histories. Like, it's not a homogeneous population at all. And even within the Caribbean islands, there are so many differences. And I just want to celebrate that, but also honor like the different histories, and they're not all good histories. Like, you know, history's complicated.
It is absolutely complicated.
It's complicated. So yeah, I've forgotten where we started on that one, but yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. And, you know, we're coming up to a short break, so we're going to pause on the history, but just picking up on some of the key things that you mentioned. You know, we're not all one homogeneous group. So whether you're from, even within Jamaica itself, right? Very different upbringing, very different cultures. We talked about that you're born in Kingston, I was born in the country, right? We had very different upbringing, but we're still part of one amazing country. And here we are together here in Canada, which is absolutely amazing. So we're going to take a short break. And when we return, we'll pick up the conversation with Debbie talking about cataloging the rich legacy of Jamaican Canadians right here in Ontario. We'll be right back.
watching Rogers TV.
Welcome back to In Conversation with Alethia. I'm in the studio with Debbie, and we're talking about cataloging the rich history of the Jamaican-Canadian diaspora as part of her PhD research. So we left the segment talking about the importance, and I want to pick up on that conversation, Debbie, on the significance of curating this legacy for the next generation, how critically important it is.
I love that you're saying curating, because I'm not making an archive, I'm not doing anything, I'm just pulling things together a little bit and caring for them, and that's what curating means. It means caring for them.
I love it.
And why is it important for the next generation? Well, one is language. So I'm really concentrating on audiovisual archives. I'm in the Cinema and Media Studies department at York, and I wasn't expecting to find audiovisual archives, like maybe some cassette tapes in the community, because I didn't really know anyone with film cameras or video cameras or anything like that.
You know you're dating yourself when you talk about cassette tapes.
Sorry.
We're dating ourselves.
But that's interesting. It's so interesting what's on there. Like, you know, my mom was saying, oh, Daddy used to record the radio. There was a black radio station in Toronto back in the 70s. And I was hoping he would still have those, but he doesn't. But he would just record off the radio, and that's pretty incredible. So if anyone has that, that would be great. But also, yeah, for the next generation, like the audiovisual archives, you can hear the language, you can hear how people speak them. Like in VHS tapes, like I was able to digitize the Heritage Singers, which is a Jamaican folk and theater group. Or it's more than, it's let's say Caribbean, but they're really sort of framing themselves as a Canadian folk group, but having this heritage, like celebrating the heritage that they're from. And so they have Jamaican folk songs, they have gestures, they're playing dominoes, they're creating theater, and they're speaking patois.
Amazing. They've
brought Miss Lou into some of their performances, and these are all on VHS tapes that I've been able to have digitized with an arm of like a research network from York called Archive Counter Archive. So, you know, for the next generation to see that rich history, like, you know, like it doesn't start with Bob Marley.
Yes, so
you know,
true.
It's so much more, and even now it's more than Bob Marley. Like most people outside of the Jamaican community just know about Bob Marley, but reggae's gone way beyond that.
Yes.
And you know, some of the older folks don't really appreciate the music that's being out, but that's being older folks. But you know, like there's rich dance hall, like even the dance hall I grew up within the 90s. You know, dub plates were produced, and those are single records with they're like samples on it, and it was just like a one thing. Like, if there's anybody with dub plates, that would be amazing to just care for within your collection, your own collection. But I also have access to like Clara Thomas archives at York, where things could be, artifacts could be preserved like that.
Wow, and that's good to note. But before we touch that, I want to go back to the fact that there's more than just reggae music in Jamaica, right? When we look at, from even an academic perspective, there are so many academic leaders, PhD students, doctors that were born and raised in Jamaica, and some are living here in Canada. We have one in front of us right now, right? Embarking on such an amazing journey. But even when one of the things that I found out when I was doing a little bit of research was that the former Prime Minister of Jamaica, Michael Manley, fought as part of the Canadian Air Force in World War II. I did not know that. That is an amazing piece of history.
Know that. I knew there was a long relationship with like the Trudeau family in Canada.
Absolutely.
But I did not know that.
Right, and so that's one of the wonderful things that I love about Canada, and I always talk about Canada as a mosaic, right? There's so much rich history when it comes to looking at not just Canadian history, but now the influence that, you know, the Jamaican diaspora has on Canada and the impact from a sports perspective. Let's talk about Donovan Bailey, right? World record holder, Olympic record holder for Canada, right? Jamaican background. And there are so many other individuals that have had notable achievements right here in Canada from the Jamaican community. So it's amazing that you're archiving, you're cataloging and curating this amazing history. And you touched on Clara Thompson. Can you talk a little bit about that work and how your work now connects to the Clara Thompson archives at the university?
Yeah, so there are university archives. They preserve everything from the professors and all the documents that the university produces. But there's a specialty at York in that there are different ethnic communities in, say, the Ontario area that have community archives there, and this is sort of a fairly recent development. So the Portuguese community has their own archive there. Now it's the Hellenic community, it's the Greek and Cypriot communities that have an archive there, and or that have some of their archives preserved there. So they collect some of the documents that people donate, and also the Egyptian Migrations Project also has some records there. But that's sort of where records can be preserved, like in this really controlled ways. So, but these projects also have a digital side to them. They all have websites or projects that come out of that, exhibitions that come out of that sort of enliven the records and curate them in a different way in a community setting. And so that's sort of the goal of this, and to have it become bigger than a research project. Like, this is just to get it started, but to have more people involved and
maybe the next generation will pick it up and
maybe
continue.
The next generation.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing that we touched on at the beginning of the show, we didn't quite flesh out, was when the pool opened up for immigration, so Jamaicans to migrate to Canada as part of the domestic worker scheme. I believe part of that influx and why we see, such a large number of Jamaicans in Ontario was there was a program in the 60s that allowed families to reunite, and so that allowed for the pool of immigrants to be able to open up. And so we had families sponsoring their wives and spouses and moms and dads. And again, that helps with the current number of Jamaicans that are in the diaspora, and again with the contributions of the many Jamaican businesses that we've seen that have been established from the early days of the 60s that are still present as part of Canada's fabric. What are your thoughts about, such a rich legacy?
Yeah, and it's even older than that.
Yes,
like, there were Jamaicans that came up in the 1800s, as porters, or and who knows what else, what else they did. But yeah, I guess I see that immigration program in two ways. Like, once it separated families.
Yes.
So many children were left in Jamaica, and there's certainly people in my family who were, whether they went to the States or to Canada. Yeah, so that was one pool of immigration with the domestic worker scheme and the family reunification. And then when I came up, it was after that. And so there were just a lot of people, and I lived in a neighborhood with a lot of Caribbean folks. And it was really rich. It was a really mixed neighborhood, and everybody, I don't know, it was just joyous.
I love that.
And then you had people who had just immigrated from the islands, at the same time, so you were coming from the same experience. It was really quite joyous. Yeah. So
now I'm curious. So when I look at Canada, and I keep saying mosaic, and some may say it's a melting pot, but when you have such a rich community, how have you yourself just integrated, and what are some of those traditions that you've kept and maybe even morphed to be part of this beautiful country that we are in now?
Yeah, so we have, I don't know, probably this is in a lot of immigrant households. You have the turkey. I think, a lot of the foods, the junk foods come in. I remember begging my mother to make craft dinner.
Ah, yes, yes.
Back in the 80s. Yeah, so things like that. You know, other traditions, like, you know, we love to go to the Christmas parades. I go to the Caravana parade. It was a long time when I didn't.
Amazing.
And now I'm going again because I live closer. Yeah, what other, I mean...
And now I know that even from a Jamaican perspective, you know, the traditional dish, you know, the ackee and saltfish. And so is that something, a tradition that you have kept with your family, and now you've got a diverse, even more diverse family?
Yes, yeah, so I've married a German who's learned how to cook jerk chicken.
Amazing.
Dumplings, ackee and saltfish, pumpkin soup. You know, I don't do the oxtail.
Fair enough.
Yeah, a lot of those foods I try to keep. And then I have some Chinese foods as well that I integrate. I'm not very good at it, but I can cook a little bit of that.
And part of that is from your heritage, again, going back home on your mom's side.
Yeah.
So again, when we talk about, you know, that melting pot, that history is absolutely rich and so culturally diverse.
Yeah.
I love it. And, you know, I touched on earlier that, you know, Jamaica's motto is out of many, one people. And I think you're a testament to that because, you know, your background by itself is so culturally diverse and rich that the motto just... it is what it is.
Right, but at the same time, it's mostly a Black country, right?
Absolutely.
So I think this is where I'm trying to center, like, the culture. It's Black culture for the most part. There might be little bits and pieces that have come in, whether it's curry chicken from the Indo-Caribbean folks, or fried rice from
the Asian.
From the Asian. So it is out of many one people to an extent, but it's really like even out of all those many people, most are Black and have Black heritage. So it's also centering that.
That's brilliant. Brilliant. I love that. So where do you see the project going? And I know we're coming towards the end of the show, but where do you see this project going after you've cataloged or curated all of this rich history?
Yeah, so I'm concentrating on audiovisual archives, so I'm recording oral histories. I've digitized a number of VHS tapes from the heritage singers. So the immediate end of this project is to have exhibitions within the community spaces.
Amazing.
So it is figuring out what those spaces are. My dream would be to have something mobile, like a you know, these box carts that you'd have in Jamaica.
Love it.
But to have that kind of idea of that mobility and to like go to the block party in Shelburne or something with that, where folks could actually, you know, engage with the materials themselves.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And I think that's absolutely amazing. And I know we can talk about this for another hour and a bit, but we're towards the end of the show now, and I'd like to take some time to thank you. Thank you for the work that you're doing in the community. Thank you for taking the time to be in conversation with Alethia. It has been an amazing pleasure to host you.
Oh, thank you so much, Alethia. I enjoyed the conversation so much.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to In Conversation with Alethia. Tune in next time for another amazing episode. And thank you to all of our amazing supporters, Town Tees for providing our logo, and Moonstone by MA for providing our jewelry. Thank you so much, and tune in next time.
The Rogers TV viewer response line. Email us or connect with us on social media.
These days at your local Legion, we're marching to the beat of a different drum. On a mission to support veterans, to have fun, and to welcome everyone to our ranks.